Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Well, I'm doing pretty good, but I hear we're going to have our taxes raised.
No, I don't like that.
Cut. I don't like that. I thought our president said no new tax. Oh no, it wasn't. It wasn't our current president said no new taxes. But it looks like he's joining. I guess who's happy about a significant increase in the gasoline taxes, more than doubling it. It's 18 cents now, and he wants to raise it by 25 cents. And the Democrats love it. They think that is great. But I don't like new taxes, so wasteful. But our friend Murray Sabrin, who's running for the Senate in New Jersey as a libertarian, had a nice little pitch on this, an explanation, and it sort of sounded familiar. He said, cancel out all the federal taxes. You know, the diesel tax and the gasoline tax, don't raise them, cancel them out. And if you have to have money for infrastructure, you know, get it out of the military. You know, there's too much there. And I think it's a good suggestion, always went in that direction. But, you know, they say that one problem, and we've mentioned on the program, with a fuel tax is when the government gets it, they don't spend it on our highways. It goes into the general revenues and goes to other things, and they say it's siphoned off. And that's why one of the reasons the Democrats like it is sort of a big slush fund. But if they can slush it off, slush the funds out of the highway fund for their little boondoggles, why can't we just say, well, let's take a little bit of those highway funds for these nations overseas and the bombing and all the things that we do and just move it over. Of course, my suggestion was move it over and put it into something here, at the same time save a little bit and cut down on the deficit. But were you shocked that this administration is calling for a significant, more than doubling the federal gas tax?
Yeah, it is. You know, he's got this problem if he wants to have $1.5 trillion to rebuild the infrastructure. I don't think anyone argues that our infrastructure is what it should be, but he's got a problem of how to pay for it. You know, he's got a massive increase in military spending. He says he's going to budget cut it from elsewhere, and I don't think the numbers are adding up. And I frankly don't think the numbers add up here in terms of really a long-term solution. Apparently, raising it another 25%, 25 cents in addition to the 18.4 cents would raise about $375 billion, but over 10 years. So that's $37 billion a year. That's less than the increase that the Congress gave Trump last year on top of his military budget.
See, it won't work, and that's why they start doing it. Then they can keep adding and adding. He's always it's only going to cost $200 billion. At the same time, he throws out the figure it'll really cost 1.5. Well, the corporations are going to invest money, and the states are going to invest money. Then all of a sudden, it'll be okay. And they use that word rather casually. This is an investment? That is a misinterpretation of investment. If an individual invests money, they want it to be profitable and see how you get rewards. These aren't investments. These are government expenditures, and they're usually done through a political system. So they take the money and they play on this thing of a user fee, and then they take it and put it in a slush fund and spend it for other things. And then the benefits go to their political cronies. I wasn't on top of the list for getting some of the highway funds. And at the same time, you have a political process where you divide the money up according to what position they have in the Congress. Then, of course, there's going to be contracts. And there's going to be Davis-Bacon laws to deal with. There's going to be environmentalism involved with. And what about just inflation? Over 10 years. There's no way, even if these figures were reasonably close right now on what this might cost, they always change. And right now we're moving into a new era where there's going to be rampant inflation. So this has no meaning except for political reasons. And there's a lot of people that like this, except the middle class and the poor. I think they're going to hit harder than the wealthy when you have a modest income and you depend on driving a car or a truck. These people are going to get hit hard.
Yeah, exactly. I did a little bit of numbers on it, and the average American uses about 650 gallons of gas a year. So just that 25-cent increase will be an additional $150 per driver a year that they pay in taxes. So we say that's not a big deal. Currently, you have the 18.4 cents. You add the 25 on, each average driver would be paying about $282 a year in total federal gasoline tax. Say you have a family with 3 drivers, the man and the wife and a teenage child or something. Now you're looking at $846 a year, your total amount that you're sending to the federal government in gas taxes. That's a little bit of money.
But they just got a tax cut, so they'll be able to pay for it. You know? That's generally the way it works. But you know, it's a shame on how they do this, because technically speaking, there's no explicit authorization in the Constitution for the federal government to building highways. And everybody knew this, and they didn't do it. They can post roads, which you name in the roads, but not to build roads. And Eisenhower in 1956 was anxious to get this going. So, of course, he did this program of the interstates and got a lot of support for it. But, you know, he said that we'll use the justification for national security. So if he was able to do it then, there's no reason why, in a technical sense, some of that national security money, you know, just take it away from this stuff that's not helping us overseas. But they're not going to consider that, and they're not going to have budget cuts to pay for this. They're not going to be anywhere in the ballpark for this. It's just another political boondoggle. And you'd think the Republicans would wake up eventually. The conservatives are aware of this, and they've spoken out. But they should wake up when the Democrats love these programs. What happens when you have these budget agreements and the Democrats are sort of pretty happy, you know, with this recent budget settlement? That means the Democrats are getting a lot of what they want, and the conservatives are getting nothing. And that means the conservatives, the fiscal conservatives, are trying to protect the income that of the middle class and the people that elected Trump.
And the conservatives are just as big government, you know, this is no surprise to anyone. They want to have a huge military spending. They don't want a penny cut out of it. They want to have a huge infrastructure. They want to rebuild our roads. They want to do all these huge things, but they have no idea where the money will come from. And then you have someone, you know, many members of Congress and others will say, well, we just need to cut waste, fraud, and abuse. That's the magic wand that you can wave. And of course there is a lot of that, but that's always a way of just kicking the can down the road.
Yeah, and this is going to get much worse, the way I see it, because I think it is true. I think there is a concern, you know, for the infrastructure, but it should be the people who use it the most. It should be within the states and the communities. You don't get more money by sending it to Washington. There's a cost for the round trip, and it's more than the fuel cost of the postman sending the money up there. Yeah. There's a big cost because there's a lot taken off the top, and when it comes back, it doesn't go back to the people who paid. I mean, why wouldn't it be easy to have a Department of Transportation if let's say we have the user fee and they're collecting these billions of dollars? I think a guy with a computer probably could figure this out. Well, we got umpteen $1 billion from Texas and umpteen $1 billion from California. You qualify for this, we'll send it to this, and this is the money you're supposed to spend on keeping up the interstate. But that never crosses their mind. I mean, I just wonder, I should have looked it up, how many people are employed by the Department of Transportation, you know, in building these highways, because you got to figure out who should get the money, which politician qualifies, and which company gets to do the building, because they will be federal contracts, and they will very much involve the environmentalists being involved, and they think this is going to last forever. I think this represents the notion, which is so ingrained, in this past week it's been so evident, that deficits don't matter. The American people don't seem to care. The large majority of people in Congress don't seem to care, and they just sort of blind themselves, or they have been convinced that those of us who are concerned about debt, that we're you know, off target there, that there should never be concern for debt. And there's a lot of good conservatives that believe that one of the reasons that we lost so many elections when the Democrats were in power for 42 years is they would get the programs, get all the credit. We're probably going to say, well, deficits are bad, we'll raise taxes and try to pay these bills. And it didn't work. So they dropped, and it was a deliberate program. let's quit talking about the deficits and the debt because it's not necessary. And they had their backup, the university professors. But the end will come, and I think this is not a solution. This is adding to the problem.
Yeah, and that just come back to what you said earlier, how it's going to affect lower income people. You know, they that 25 cents is equal for everyone, millionaires and the people in the rural areas. Excuse me, who would tend to drive more anyway. They've got further to drive to get to places. You can imagine what it might do to the economy too, though. It's going to cost you an extra $5-6 to fill your gallon. You may not go and do something. You may not go drive to the store. There may be other things you decide not to do because it costs too much.
And that messes up the figures too. They may have driving habits change, which they did when it would spike real high. All of a sudden there are some changes. I mentioned the fact that inflation cannot be calculated, how that will really affect it. But what if these electric cars are really successful? My goodness, what are they going to do? You know, if 50% of the people get electric cars, which I'm not predicting, but if that were to happen, I don't think anybody knows exactly what it'll be like in 5 or 10 years from now, you know, what the habits are be. If we're really in the doldrums trying to correct this huge debt monster that we have, you can't tell how long the economy would be sluggish, and this thing could not make any sense. You know what they'll do? They'll just buckle down and say, we need it more now than ever because it'll be a works program and we'll create jobs. Just like they argue about the military. We talked about that yesterday. It's a jobs program. Yeah. Spend the jobs, and they do believe in military Keynesianism and domestic Keynesianism and infrastructure Keynesianism. Create jobs. We'll worry about the highway some other day.
Yeah. Well, Murray Sabrin has it right. If they need the money, as we talked about yesterday, they got 400 and some thousand properties overseas that the DoD owns. Sell a couple of these and pay for it.
Right, and we need to congratulate Murray for making that point. I wish him well in his campaign. But I want to thank all the viewers today for tuning in, and hopefully we can stir up a little bit of interest to saying that we can't deficit finance everything forever. And 25-cent gasoline tax right now is going to be a political detriment, and it's going to be a financial detriment. It will not help, and someday we'll have to wake up and say, you know, we ought to pay our bills. Until we realize that, you know, we're going to have to decide when we face up to the real cost, and that is when the economy is declared bankrupt and the economy quits functioning. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.